hello and welcome to Just Onside. It's Monday, it's wet, it's depressing, it's miserable in Blackburn. What about Dubai?
Fine over here, mate.
It's been an absolute shocker here. It's been wet, and as you know, Blackburn game got cancelled, waterlogged pitch. So it shows you how much rain there's been around in East Lancashire. So it's a very miserable and dark and dingy Blackburn. But I'm glad that it's quite nice in Dubai. How was your weekend?
Yeah, it was good. Always good to have some sport, good games on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So my weekend was good. Your weekend was threatening to be a little bit difficult, but Ayub, how's your tick after those late goals won against you and then
This
finally
is
pulling out a winner?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, anybody who lives to be about 70 and a Leeds supporter, I don't know how they've made it because this club puts you through the ringer. And again, yesterday was just a game, high drama. If you're a neutral, it's a fantastic game. If you're a Leeds supporter, my goodness me, again, they sort of put us through so many emotions. Uh, we got it back to 3-2, equaliser for Swansea in the 90th minute, and then honestly, I I was absolutely going berserk. And within, I think, a minute or two, Nonto scores the winner. So in the end, I'm delighted. But again, this is one of my reasons why I just think we're going to struggle. I don't, because we're a far superior side. Swansea aren't any. They're not mugs. They're quite difficult at home. But really, we shouldn't be sort of having to score last minute winners to win against teams like Swansea. But in the end, all's well that ends well. So I'm a happy bunny. So certainly as a Leeds supporter, I'm happy. But if you're a Man City supporter, you're not going to be too happy. Uh, I on the bounce. We did a little feature on Man City and Guardiola and what's going wrong, and it seems to be getting worse. Credit to Spurs. It's not taking away from Spurs, but there seems to be when I watched the game, they started all right, Man City, but from when they were about a goal, two goals down, I've never seen City look so bereft of ideas, and this is not the City that we've known over the last few years. So serious problems for Guardiola. And I've always said that he's a great coach of great players, but when it comes to players missing, key players missing, he's found wanting. Uh, 5 games without a win, five losses on the bounce seems to prove my case. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, you touched on it first, Ayub. Let's speak about Spurs briefly because ultimately the story is Man City. It was the result of the season, I think you'll agree. But I think Spurs deserve a huge amount of credit. They've actually defeated City twice now in that run of five defeats, once in the League Cup as well, to book their semi-final date against Manchester United in a few weeks. Look, firstly, from a Spurs perspective, rode out an early storm, I would say. Man City should have been probably ahead early doors, and it looked quite open at the back, obviously missing their first choice centre backs in Romero and Van der Ven. So you felt as though Spurs were in for a long evening. A wounded Man City, that was the narrative. Pep Guardiola signing a contract to put to bed perhaps some uncertainty about his future. And Man City started fairly well. You felt as though the goal would come, create some great openings for Haaland, for Foden, even for Savinho. So you did feel as though, okay, Man City should or feel like they're good for a goal or two. And then as Spurs grew into the game, Spurs obviously were then pretty much, I thought, the better team, or at least the most incisive team in terms of threatening, in terms of goals. Spurs, I think, have played this way before at Etihad. They're one of the few teams who have given Man City consistent problems under the Pep Guardiola reign. And I thought they played some incredible stuff, really did. What I love about Spurs is, okay, we'll come on to perhaps some of their shortcomings briefly, but just in terms of their ability to commit men forward, decisive football, incisive. I thought Kulusevski in the first half keeping great width on that side, causing Guardiola all types of issues. But in terms of just their offensive output, so many runners. I thought Sarr, Bissouma, Madison were all over that midfield. I mean, Gundogan and Rico Lewis felt incredibly light. They looked incredibly wanting. I think Rico Lewis, one aspect of his game, which I'm not a huge fan of, is he often finds himself on the floor simply just because he's too slight a figure. Now, he's a tidy footballer, but he's just too slight, in my humble opinion. Often finds himself being brushed off and what have you. But Spurs were incredibly dynamic, played some really good stuff. They're always looking to play forward, which I really like. It's not possession for possession's sake. They look to play forward. They look threatening. They got so many 3-on-3s, 4-on-4s. Solanke, I mean, he may not have the goal scoring prowess of a Harry Kane, who does, but his link up is that of a young Kane in terms of the way he links things up, running in behind. But I thought they were well worthy of, in the end, what was a fairly comfortable win, simply because they had all aspects covered: counter attacking, pace, being able to play progressive football through the thirds. I was thoroughly, thoroughly impressed. Of course, for Spurs, the challenge is how do they bring that mentality and focus game in, game out, especially against lesser opposition? That's the biggest frustration, because if they can play like this against the best team in the league for the last decade or so, give or take, then for sure they should be able to play that against lesser opposition, because Man City ultimately are the standard. So incredible win for Spurs. But look, let's get to the main story here. I mean, Man City, 5 defeats in a row. Never really happened, I don't think, under the Pep Guardiola reign. And I thought it was quite a poignant defeat, Ayub. It felt as though, I don't know if you felt it as well in terms of watching it. There were so many aspects which I was very surprised with just very quickly. Um, as the game was progressing, just very quickly, I just thought, I mean, Spurs are 2-0 up. I mean, we'll go to the goals, but it felt as though this was a moment, as though even Guardiola started to second guess his troops. It was as though even he threw the towel in. You'd think at half time you're losing 2-0, it's at home, you're on the back of a bad run. This feels like a now or never moment. Yet the only change he made at half time was to bring on Ake, I believe, for Stones. You thought, irrespective of what the fitness is like for Grealish or De Bruyne, you feel you had to deploy them there and then. The next offensive change he makes is at the 74th minute. Now, if you watch the first 30 minutes of the second half, the game just drifted from a Man City perspective. And I just remember thinking, whilst the clock was ticking 55, 57, 60, I was like, he must feel as though the history of Man City in terms of their ability to come back against teams, they've come back famously against Spurs, being 2-0 down at the Etihad. You thought he would reenact some of that and say, boys, I believe in you. I'm going to make a few subs. I still think we can win this game, because that's the Man City aura. Even 60-minute mark, they'll feel we can win this game. It was as though he was accepting that this is our fate right now. This is where we are as a team. And I was very surprised. Some might say De Bruyne wasn't fit. And look, I'm not going to demean a player who I believe is one of the greatest midfielders that we've seen in the Premier League, but he looks unfit. And I'm being kind. I don't mean unfit in terms of, sure, he looks like he's put on a few pounds as well. He's not moving as well as he would. He's not as slight as he once was. He's not as dynamic in his running. He's very much getting the ball to feet, and he can still pass with the best of them. We know this. But he looks like he's not quite as fit as he needs to be. I looked at his last 4 or 5 games. You'd be surprised. I mean, early November, November 2nd, he was on the bench. He wasn't brought on. He then came on against Sporting, I believe. It was in the 84th minute. And then he's had back-to-back games now with an international break in between, where he didn't go to Belgium duty, where he's come on the pitch 74th minute. So just to give you a bit of a view, he was on the substitute bench 2nd of November. You'd think he'd be able to ramp his fitness up, especially with the international break, to be able to play at least some meaningful role. Look at Odegaard. The first time he was available, yes, he was on the bench for the first game, but the next game he started and played 96 minutes against Chelsea. Now, I'm not saying the injuries are similar and all the rest of it,
Hmm.
but you'd think he'd have been able to ramp up his fitness over the course of 3 solid weeks, bearing in mind that was the gap between when he was deployed on the bench. But again, from a Man City perspective, I think the next Premier League title that Pep Guardiola will win at Man City, if he wins one, will be his most impressive. Look, they've got some injuries, but this felt a moment. This felt as though, even though they've got a lot of injuries right now, it felt as if they've somehow come to the rest of the pack. And I've always felt Man City, even when they've lost games, they've had a certain dominance in the game. They've dominated, they've battered the team, and somehow the other team, unless it's a Liverpool or what have you, has somehow just pulled one or two counter-attacking moments or something like Spurs have previously. Yet this felt as though Tottenham were thoroughly, thoroughly deserving of the win. Could have scored a few more. Constantly looked threatening. That there was an eerie silence that descended upon the Etihad. It just felt as though this was a moment when Man City looked vulnerable to the extent where they just felt like another team, a good team, and a team that's besieged with a few injuries, but they felt fragile. That's the word that Pep Guardiola used. And I just couldn't help thinking that I was watching a team that was aging together. I mean, you saw what Kyle Walker was like right at the very end when
Mhm.
Werner just absolutely ran past him. He's really struggling right now, Kyle Walker. Difficult to see how he is a starting right back for England at the World Cup next year. But yeah, this looked like a moment in time perhaps when some of that aura started to slip. Yes, there are some extenuating circumstances. They're missing the best player in the world, Ballon d'Or winner Rodri, and they are missing some key players, and some players are out of form. But there seemed to be a fragility there. There seemed to be a vulnerability there. There were a few confused looking faces out there on the pitch in the second half where they were not quite sure how to go about breaking a Spurs team down. They look a team that's bereft of any power, athleticism, dynamism. They look like a very safe team. And I think nowadays with the Premier League the way it is, uh, teams are quick, teams are powerful. And I think more and more you'll see teams perhaps expose some of those vulnerabilities. Look, I'm not saying this is it's going to get worse. Next week looms large. We'll cover it, I'm sure, in detail down the road. But this definitely felt like a moment in time when it comes to Pep Guardiola's time at Man City. And again, if they are to win another Premier League under Pep Guardiola, I do think it'll be one of his, if not his, biggest Premier League triumph to date.
I mean, you say if they win another league title, if in January they spend big, get some good players, that might make the difference. But again, the question I've always posed is how good is Pep Guardiola when he's coaching perhaps not the greatest players? Now, at a time where you really want to sort of see what he's made of. Uh, and he continues over the last few weeks, certainly in my opinion, that he's just not good enough to be able to cope or compensate for the players that are missing. He seems to just think that there is a Man City way or there is a Guardiola way of playing football. He has to realize if the personnel isn't there, he needs to adapt. He needs to have a different strategy until the main players come back. Now, Guardiola, Rodri obviously is going to be missing for virtually all the season. So he has to now devise a new way of playing or at least tinker or tweak. He seems to be unable to do that. And that's where my criticism is of Pep Guardiola, that if you want to call yourself one of the greatest coaches ever, you have to adapt when circumstances are trying or challenging. He doesn't seem to have the answer at all.
It's funny you say that because I was watching Russell Martin yesterday, obviously, who's coach of Southampton, and Southampton were playing a very specific way against Liverpool. And I couldn't help but think, wow, if this is the modern way, this is incredible. I like Russell Martin, but his stubbornness is going to get Southampton
Mm.
comfortably relegated. It was incredible what some of the things they were trying yesterday against Liverpool and paid the price multiple times. So I hear you even on that scale. Look, who are we to second guess Pep Guardiola? He's an incredible manager. I think you agree. It's a legitimate point you make because even I was trying to understand what he was thinking in the second half. Like I said, as the game's drifting, you're getting played off the park. But Spurs are a vulnerable team. You've seen them. They're not a juggernaut. They've had some tough results. Or even the result at home the week before against Ipswich, handing them their first victory of the Premier League season. So you think, okay, how can I start to give them cause for concern? How can I create some vulnerability? If I can get a goal in the first 15 minutes of the second half, it's game on. We can win this game. Yet he made no offensive substitutions. It just felt as though he let the game drift. And I mentioned that he signed a contract at Ayub in a very emotional state. And I think I wouldn't say rubbish those claims. You were suggesting that he's probably thought it out a lot more. But you hear some of the rhetoric, some of the sound bites after this game. He talks about how it was my duty. I could not leave at this time. I think he felt a responsibility given everything that's happening on the pitch, off the pitch, to stay with Man City and perhaps not make what might be considered a smarter choice, which is perhaps to walk away. Now, I still think, again, it was quite an emotional decision to stay, and there's nothing wrong with that. He feels an attachment with the club, so I'm not suggesting that it wasn't, but it feels as though he's got I want to say a rebuilding job, but it's most likely De Bruyne's last season at the club. He spoke about it that he's not been offered a new contract. He's on obviously a very tidy sum, upwards of 300k a week. So you wonder how that's going to go. The fact that he didn't feel confident enough to play him, or at least play him substantial minutes, when again he's been in the squad for the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's just interesting to know. And you're right. Look, they are missing Rodri. They were missing Kovacic. Obviously, he's out for a couple of weeks, and they're missing centre backs. They've got injuries. Nobody's disputing that. Even Doku was missing. A fully fit Man City are still there at the very top. There's no two ways about it. But I said heading into that Brighton game that these next games loom large for Man City, and it's proven to be the case. So you would be massively concerned. Obviously, they're heading into a huge game. It just felt as though it was the first time I've watched them, and I thought they looked an okay team and no more. Again, a very tidy
Mm,
team,
yeah.
knocking it around fine without real penetration. Yes, they caused a few situations. They were good for a goal or two. Don't get me wrong. I still thought they were good for a goal or two. Vicario made a few great saves, a few blocks, but there was an air of vulnerability, and I felt there was indecision within the squad, within the playing personnel, as though this feels like a step too far for us this game. As the game was going along, there was no real kind of, hey, let's get one. There was no real power. There's no like cajoling the fans to try and get them on side and creating some sort of atmosphere to overwhelm Spurs, which is what you think would have happened if they'd got a goal in the first 15, 20 minutes after half time. Again, credit to Spurs, but it felt as though, like I said, a moment where it's clear they're not the best team in the league. I think that's fair to say. And although they're second, let's see how next week pans out. But it's a huge job on his hands. I think not just in terms of recovery for this season. They've obviously got still hopes and expectations in the league, in the Champions League. But I think moving forward as well, it's a job. And I always say this when a team's aura starts to slip, and this is more than just a little blip, teams are creating clear cut opportunities against them this season. Even the games they've won are your Wolves, Fulham, just to mention a few. Even Arsenal look very comfortable with 10 men for the most part in the second half. Once that aura starts to slip, it's very difficult to arrest that and bring that back. It takes an extended period of dominance once more to get that back. If teams feel as though they can create opportunities against you, that's always, always, always half the battle. I feel like teams feel that with a bit of pace, with a bit of vertical running, you can get at this back line. And it'll be very interesting to see how City recover. Again, do I think they're just going to slip away? Absolutely not. Let's not be stupid. I just think with the form they're in, with the potential fixture, with the fixture coming up next as well, in terms of their short-term aspirations of winning the league, I think that looks currently a step too far.
Well put. I'm absolutely convinced that as part of his negotiations for signing the contract, I'm sure he said, "Look, is your checkbook ready for January?" to the owner. So I'm pretty certain that there will be incomings because this is the only way Guardiola, Guardiola is able to coach. He has to have great players. So I think he's probably saying, well, look, what I have at the moment, I'm not capable. He probably obviously never said that because he wouldn't say that. But I think his conditions must have been right. Are you going to allow me to spend big in January? Yes. Okay, I'll sign. Uh, that's my thoughts.
I'm still not convinced that that's going to be the decision as to whether or not he's going to extend or not. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at a player like is it Baleba of Brighton? He's a good young, dynamic, powerful defensive midfielder. I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at someone like him. Um, they need some power. They need some dynamism in the middle of the park in terms of some strength. Look, they're a relatively easy team to play against right now. Spurs consistently, and again, huge credit, but they dominated the middle of the park, and it wasn't slow from Spurs. It was just one touch, two touch, and before you know it, Madison was in so much space. Son was in so much space. You had Porro running the other side, or Doggy running right through. So many spaces that you wouldn't ordinarily see because either the City would have another 10% extra possession, whether it's through Rodri or what have you, or alternatively, they just shut you out. You wouldn't get these type of situations before. It used to be difficult to create opportunities against Man City, and now consistently teams are creating easily four or five relatively straightforward chances against them. And that's the vulnerability that starts to dissipate. I mean, Kyle Walker, amazing career he's had, but he had probably 10 quality years at the very top of his game, at the peak of his powers. And now you're starting to see a little bit of slippage, which you invariably do. He's had a lot of legs or a lot of miles in those legs. You got to think about it. This team has played a lot of games physically in terms of actually the count of games, not just for club but also for country. These are top professionals. But also there's the mental toll of playing big games, Champions League semi-finals, finals, Premier Leagues when teams are pushing it, like Liverpool have, like Arsenal have. It's the first time I felt as though they were. It's that famous Nasser Hussain saying, which is that sometimes when England, for example, won the Ashes in 2005, it takes forever to climb that mountain, and thereafter you never want to see a mountain ever again because it took you that much, and it feels as though City just they didn't seem to have the fight, which I was a little bit surprised with. The game just petered out. I mean, that Porro goal is just there was just a gloom that descended upon the Etihad. Look, incredible result for Spurs. I spoke to a Spurs fan, their biggest result probably since Lucas Moura's hat trick away to Ajax in that Champions League semi-final to book their trip to Madrid against Liverpool. But yeah, I mean, from a Man City perspective, huge questions. The toughest fixture coming up for them next season. It's a moment for them to kind of put a fork in the road and put a line in the sand and say, look, we're ready. We've got to stand up and be counted here. But the signs are ominous in terms of what the immediate short-term future looks like. Is it irretrievable? I think it still somehow is, but they are definitely not the team that they once were. They need all of their troops back and somehow to get some consistency from players like Ford and like De Bruyne, like Bernardo Silva, if they're able to salvage anything meaningful from this season.
Like, look, sounds like depressing times for Man City. Uh, but let's stay in Manchester. Amorim, his first game against Ipswich, started off majestically, and our friend Rashford from America, he scored. So he sort of shut people up for at least the first 5 minutes, and thereafter, I think he didn't have the greatest game, but uh, it was. I suppose it's difficult to gauge and comment after one game. But what are your thoughts? Because I thought that Ipswich were worthy of the draw. Maybe on another day they probably would have won the game. So what were your initial thoughts? Or is it far too early to make a comment?
I don't want to draw too many conclusions, but first things first, it was the first time I felt as though this team could stay up. That's the first thing. Because there's nothing like sitting through like 94, 95 minutes, what it was, and watching them and thinking this team's actually played quite well. They have a way of playing. McKenna's really got them playing some stuff. Yes, it took them a few games to get up to speed with the league, but they got a huge win last week. I thought they were the better team yesterday. Created some great opportunities once they fell a goal behind. I mean, Delap, it's an incredible save from Onana, but you've got to score. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Wonderfully created as well. But Ipswich on the just in the first instance, I thought were really good, really well worth the point. It would have been a travesty if they'd lost. They played some great stuff. They were on the front foot. Um, What's really interesting from a Manchester United perspective, I mean, look, we said we're not going to judge him, and I'm not going to judge him. I'm still not going to judge him this season, probably not even most of next season. And he has asked for time, and I think he's deserving of that. Is the manager, so I'm not going to connect anything that I saw other than the formation to what imprint or influence this manager has had on this team. He picked a team, interestingly, with Diallo and Mazraoui, or Dallo, I should say, as kind of inverted fullbacks or wingbacks, I should say. And Diallo, to his credit, I thought did a good job, other than one or two minor lapses, but that's going to take some time. But yeah, got off to an amazing start, created by Diallo. Great goal by Rashford. Good running, lots of running through the box. It was interesting the first 10, 15 minutes. I mean, you look at midfield of Eriksen and Casemiro, and they were having to really run around quite a lot. Ipswich had the extra man in midfield, and he felt as though not sure this is going to be able to last with Eriksen and Casemiro. And that's what it proved over the course of the game. Ipswich exerted more and more control in that area. United definitely tapered off and hung on, I thought, largely for the draw, albeit he made quite a few substitutions. But there was nothing I saw that made me think, oh, I like this or I like that. It's still some of the personnel that ideally for Ruben Amorim are not going to be part of his long-term plan. So it's hard to read too much into that. Again, interesting from a stylistic point of view and from a formation point of view. There's no reason why the formation can't work. Conte's won Premier League titles playing that formation, so it's not a formation thing. But yeah, not so much to read into. It was a typical United game to some extent. I thought the opposition were the better team. Like I said, Ipswich I thought were the ones pushing, if I can say that. He'll be pleased, Ruben Amorim, that they didn't lose. I think if they'd lost, there wouldn't have been too many questions asked irrespective. I think the season, something you mentioned, you is somewhat of a write-off. I mean, they might still harbour hopes that if they can have a strong second half of the season, there might be some outside hopes of a top four finish. But the team on the whole looks short. They look short of goal scoring prowess, consistency up front. It's not a team that's creating a whole bunch of open opportunities and still look vulnerable at the back. Ipswich created, I thought, many a good opportunity. And if they'd been a bit more prolific, could have scored three or four. So again, it's a draw. It's a positive result. It's a point away from home. They've got a few games coming up at home, which they'll hope to kind of start to get up the table, especially into the top half of the table. But yeah, nothing really of note. And I think he'll be pretty pleased just to get off the mark with a point.
And credit to Ipswich, though. You're absolutely right. Ipswich uh, were superb. Were excellent. I mean, they're at they're in the bottom three, but really what showed was tremendous fight. And they've still got many players who are playing in the championship. So really, credit to McKenna because he's making uh, sort of I won't sort of say average players, but players who obviously have sort of plied their trade uh, in 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 the championship and lower. So they gave a really good account of themselves, and they're in with a shout. They're in with a shout. I mean, I must confess that I was thinking they were shoo-ins for relegation, but they are showing enough quality, uh, and I think results like yesterday will give them a tremendous amount of confidence. So uh, a decent point for United, I thought in the end. But I suppose it's too early to make judgments on the new coach. Right. Before we finish, I'd like to talk about Liverpool.
Yep.
Sometimes the sign of a team that's going to win the league is that they somehow they'll eke out a result. They'll find a way to win games when they're not at the best. I think yesterday was a classic example that Liverpool did that. I don't think it was a great game. I don't think Southampton were outstanding, but they battled, they hassled, they stayed in the game, but Liverpool found a way to win the game. Do you think that you are looking at the team that will win the league?
Why is it that when Liverpool win a game like that, you can wax lyrical just like you did? Yeah, when Leeds do that in on the very same day away from home and still pick up the 3 points, you sing a very different tune.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, maybe my expectations of Leeds in the Championship are a little bit different. If they were in the Premier League, might be different, but they're in the Championship. Having the best side has certain expectations, and for me, if you're the best side in a league, then I expect, on the whole, that you to be winning most of the games, and if you do win, you win reasonably easy.
Of
Well, at least
course.
that's my sort of point of view on Leeds. But right, Liverpool, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, back to proper teams. Uh, Liverpool, yeah, I mean, look, absolutely. I mean, there was never a part of me when I was watching the game felt as though Liverpool were going to lose that game, even when they felt 2-1 behind, simply because A, the amount of time that was uh, remaining. But that Liverpool always looked threatening. And again, I alluded to it earlier. Southampton will get relegated this season, and it's for one reason and one reason only. I mean, I'm always one for coaches believing in a certain style. Uh, I'm okay with it if you have the players that you know consist, or even if the success rate of playing that way is above average. I'd say, you know what, if that's the way you feel as though you can compete in this league, then so be it. This feels, in my humble opinion, a step too far from what Russell Martin is asking Southampton to do. They've got a replacement goalkeeper. Ramsdale is injured. They've got McCarthy, I believe, in goal. It was the first time. It was quite ironic, actually. If you remember when Mikel Arteta replaced Ramsdale, or when he bought Raya on loan from Brentford, he said that the reason he did that was because he felt as though there were certain games previously, in the previous times, where he didn't have the guts, he didn't have the cojones, as he would say, to bring off the goalkeeper. Yet we do that for every outfield player. If he's having a bit of a tricky period, we bring him off, we bring an outfield player on. He said, why wouldn't you do that for a goalkeeper if a goalkeeper's going through a difficult time? And that was the first time yesterday, ironic, his replacement, McCarthy, in the Southampton goal, I felt as though Russell Martin should consider taking him off because he really was. He made too many rash decisions that cost Southampton yesterday. I could count. I mean, he got away with a few flapping at corners and what have you. So yeah, that's one thing. Southampton will get relegated, simply put. I mean, it's some naive decisions. I mean, you're under pressure against Liverpool, and he rolls the ball out to a midfielder with three Liverpool presses. I mean, Liverpool are known for their press. Yeah, he just rolls the ball out to him edge of the box. Only bad things can happen from there, and bad things did happen. His decision making was shocking. Liverpool. What's amazing about Liverpool, Ayub, I don't know if you agree, is first and foremost, there's two players they've got in their team, which I believe, if they remain fit and firing for the rest of the season, I want to be by fit and firing. I just mean fit and, in terms of able to play most of the games, I do think they'll win the Premier League. Van Dijk at the back, yes, they conceded a couple of goals. They've got the best defense, I'm pretty sure. But still, he's so imperious. He's so dominant at the back. I mean, they were a bit unlucky with the first goal. Yeah, it's a bit of a mistake from Van Dijk, but still, a lot of things happened there afterwards, whether it was on the line or outside. But he's in control. He's at the back. He's back to his very best. I believe. I do think he's right now the best centre back in the league. He's playing so well, and he gives them such an air of confidence. He does. So I think him, and obviously for me right now, the PFA Player of the Year, early front runner Mo Salah. I mean, he's dominant. He's such a monster in terms of the way he's playing right now. You can tell with these big time players, Ayub, that it's not just hey, let me see if I can contribute. It's they take ownership of the game. They want to make the decisive contributions in the game. You saw that with Salah, should have had a hat trick, but always a threat in behind, working hard for the team, but making again decisive contributions. Elite mentality monsters, absolutely
Mm.
dominant at their craft. Liverpool right now, they always feel comfortable and confident they're going to score goals. And even though Southampton, yes, got a couple, you always felt Liverpool just because they have so much belief, so much confidence. They hit the post. I mean, they should have got one from Diaz when Nunes cut it across. They are a well-functioning team led by an incredibly smart and astute manager who's hitting all the right notes, especially in terms of tactical decisions, personnel decisions, the way he talks about the game, even before and after, in terms of managing expectations. They really are a superb outfit and one that's going to take some stopping in the league. Yeah, incredible win. I always thought the win was going to materialize even when Southampton were ahead, simply because of Southampton's A, propensity to concede late goals, and B, just the fact that their defending is kamikaze. It's very kind of panicky and what have you. But Liverpool, again, they just have a certain superiority complex right now in games. They don't feel vulnerable. Even when teams score, you don't think they're panicking. They play quality football, incisive football, great contributions off the bench as well, which is probably the key right now. They're able to bring some quality off the bench to make big contributions, and they will take some stopping. They are the favourites for the league, rightly so. Next week is a huge opportunity for them to deliver what they will see as a decisive blow to their historical rivals. But yeah, they'll take some stopping, and I think this manager deserves a lot of credit. And it probably ultimately comes down to those two players that I mentioned. If those two play for the majority of the season, they will not only fancy their chances of you in the Premier League, but right now I would say the Champions League is pretty wide open as well. And they are top of the Champions League groups right now. They will fancy it. They're going up against a Real Madrid team that will be absent of Vinicius Jr. because he's got a hamstring injury. I think this season could be a magical one. Let's see. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. But it's one that promises much for them right now.
I'd add Kanate as well too. You've talked about Van Dijk, Salah, but I think Kanate is an absolute beast. I think he's an unbelievably good defender, and I think I don't know whether this is giving Van Dijk the confidence again that he knows he's got a partner. I mean, he's always been an exceptional defender, Van Dijk, but when you know you've got somebody as good as Konate next to you, maybe that sort of gives you an added authority that you know that you really can just play your game without having to worry about your partner. Uh, a few issues. My concern is the left back issue at Liverpool. I think Robertson is really struggling. He's really struggling. I think there's been a few games where he's been exposed. I think against Saka. Now, anybody would have a tough game against Saka, but the one-on-one, I was watching and I knew that something he was going to do something rash, and He didn't disappoint. He did. Now you can question whether it was on the line or
Yeah.
not, but it was you expect better. And I think this is maybe where uh, some of the problems might have because it's an area uh, of weakness. Their replacement, I mean, I think he was injured, but again, there's not much strength on that side. Now you probably could put Gomez there, who's a better defender, but he's not a natural left back. But in terms of the way that you summarised Liverpool, I think you're absolutely right. They are a team that is full of confidence. I think they've got a coach who 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 has settled in, and nobody talks about Klopp. I mean, in fact, uh, I can't think of many Liverpool fans who perhaps are missing Klopp at this moment in time because he has done a wonderful job. He just looks and feels as if he was born to manage Liverpool. He's assured, he's confident, he's got the backing of the players, and he's finding ways to win games of football, which you can't ask for more than that.
What's really interesting about him, you mention it, especially off the field, you hear some of his interviews, and this is not a criticism of Ruben Amorim. I think that would be totally unfair. I was one who was praising his openness in his interview with Gary Neville in his press conference, but it was brought to my attention that perhaps he's being a tad too open. I didn't mind that. He's got to get the Manchester United fans on side, so he's being a bit open. I don't mind managers speaking their hearts and sharing a bit more than just normal platitudes. But it was interesting post game yesterday against Ipswich as well, after Ipswich, that he spoke about how the players were trying, but perhaps thinking too much. And he's very open in his assessment. It'll be interesting to see if he does that moving forward, because you can see where if they go through a run of games where they lose games, you can see how that could be misconstrued or twisted by the media to suggest, oh, there'll be a few perhaps misgivings within the squad about how open he's being about some of the failures within the squad. So I'd keep an eye on that. In contrast, with Arne Slot, he had perhaps a more difficult road to travel, didn't he? He was following a legend. Invariably, normally there's some sort of, you saw that Old Trafford, there's some sort of come down there afterwards. You're thinking, oh, it's going to be a season of transition. But I remind people, Liverpool were very competitive last year, just fell off at the back end, perhaps due to their inability to defend and not be able to keep clean sheets. Yet now with honest luck, he's hitting all the right notes, says all the right things. Even after the game, he spoke about how it's a bit early. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. And look, they are the favourites. I think nobody can dispute that. The bookies are very rarely wrong about these things. Um, and rightly so. They've earned that. I think it's out of respect for Liverpool that we believe them to be the favourites. But he strikes the right tone. He's very differential about what Klopp uh, put together at Liverpool. He talks openly about how he's got a long way to go, but he's also very assured by the same token as well. So the team clearly is responding to him. He's getting the best out of a lot of players. There's not too many. I mean, Robertson, perhaps yes. This does definitely feel like his last year at Liverpool as a first choice left back. Maybe at home to Southampton, away to Southampton, you could probably still get away with it.
Hmm.
But you're right, it was one of many errors already this season from Robertson. It feels as though he's a yard short, doesn't he? In terms of it creeping up on him. Although to be fair, Tyler Dibbling, as you know, he's a top player. He'll be in the Premiership next year,
Very good, yeah.
next year regardless. So yeah, I mean, look, Liverpool, you're right. I think managers hitting all the right notes. Of course, they're going to have some troubled times this season. They invariably will. They'll have perhaps one or two injuries. They've got one or two to dealing with right now, not least the goalkeeper. So they'll have a few moments this year, but it'll be interesting to see how they overcome that. Right now, they've got a couple of players, and I always say the big players, you want them A, available,
Hmm.
B, on top form, and C, making decisive contributions. And Salah, he's just it felt inevitable. I mean, even that second goal, again, goalkeeper's gone AWOL, but it's just assured, it's calm. He's running in behind. He's not
Hmm.
saying, hey, pass it to my feet. He's saying, no, give it to me in behind. I can get there. Decisive contributions by the big players. You hear some of his words today talking about a contract. He just screams, that kind of professional way. He's like, he understands the value that he brings to Liverpool Football Club. And he's at the absolute peak of his powers, top of his game. Difficult always around Christmas time, a lot of games, thick and fast. It'll be interesting to see how they manage his minutes and his time as well. But Liverpool right now are functioning well, dealing with one or two injuries, like I mentioned, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Alisson. But the season is one that's showing to be very promising. And I'll reiterate once more, Yub, I think they'll have their designs on the Champions League as well. I've not seen a team yet. I mean, some might say Barcelona have started the season incredibly well. And there's always the European giants. But Liverpool are a European giant as well, and they will feel as though two legs, with their ability to score home and away, that they will feel as though they can go deep in that competition as well. So maybe early doors, let's just see. But for sure, right now in the box seat when it comes to the Premier League.
I've got them down for winning the league, so I think they'll do it. I'm saying to some Liverpool fans, might as well book a hotel for the open top bus parade because it's a done deal. 12 games, 8 point lead. It's outstanding. So that's our review for the weekend's games. We'll do another preview on Friday. Some big, massive games at the weekend, so we'll talk about that, and we might have a little special feature about who we think are going to finish in the top four. All right, so that's possibly for Friday. All right, so until then, stay safe. See you soon. Ta-ra for now.